The saltwater orchestra. Start with a soft, ambient sound of gentle waves and a light coastal breeze. After a few seconds, the narration begins, calm and confident. My name is Rithasak, or, as the magazines and the desperate young men in ill-fitting suits call me, Lok Aknha Rithasak. It's a title I bought, a signifier of success. But success isn't a title. Success is this. It's the cool, silent hum of the climate control that holds the Cambodian humidity at bay. It's the weight of a heavy crystal glass in my hand, filled with whiskey older than most of my employees. And it is this view, a sheer wall of glass, 3 stories high, looking out over the Gulf of Thailand from my cliffside villa in Kep. The sea, the sky, the distant, hazy shapes of the islands, I own this view. I bought the land, tore down the shacks, cleared the unruly jungle, and built this monument to myself. A house of glass and steel, a declaration that the future has no time for the past. My architects called it minimalist. I call it clean. There is no clutter here, no sentimental photographs, no dusty relics from a forgotten time. Everything is sharp angles, polished surfaces, and imported luxury. It is a fortress of modernity, and I am its king. Tonight the sky was clear. The stars were scattered across the black velvet like diamonds on a jeweler's cloth. I was wearing a robe of the finest Cambodian silk, the color of clotted cream, feeling the smooth fabric against my skin. All was as it should be, perfect, controlled. That's when the wind changed. It wasn't a gradual shift. It was instant. A moment ago, a gentle breeze, now a physical blow against the house. The glass, supposedly rated to withstand typhoons, hummed with a deep, vibrating tremor. I frowned, setting my glass down on the marble countertop. The sound it made was sharp, loud in the sudden, oppressive silence that fell as the cicadas outside were instantly silenced. The storm came out of nowhere. No warning on the news, no hint in the sky just minutes before. It was impossibly swift, impossibly violent. Rain, thick as thrown gravel, began to hammer against the windows. The sea, once placid, was a chaos of white-fanged waves. But through the shriek of the rising gale, a new sound began to weave its way into the night. It wasn't the roar of the wind, and it wasn't the distant rumble of thunder. It was music, distorted, mournful, and utterly out of place. It was the sound of a pinpeat orchestra, the high, ringing notes of the ronat, the deep, resonant gong of the samphur drum, the haunting wail of the esrali oboe. It was the music of ceremony, of funerals, of theater for the spirits. And it sounded like it was coming from right outside my walls. I stood there frozen, listening. The melody was disjointed, a lament played by 100 phantom musicians, all of them weeping. It coiled around the house, a serpent of sound, its scales the crashing waves, its hiss the driving rain. My first thought was practical. A wedding. A funeral in the new village down the coast. No, not in this storm, not this close. The sound was too clear, too pure, despite the gale's fury. I walked over to the control panel on the wall, its sleek touchscreen glowing in the dim light. I tapped the icon for my outdoor speakers, intending to blast something classical, something European to drown out this folk noise. But the system was unresponsive. The screen just showed static. A flicker, the lights overhead dimmed, buzzed, and then returned to their full, sterile brightness. A power surge, nothing to worry about. This house had its own generator, a beast of a machine buried deep in the concrete foundations. Still, a knot of irritation tightened in my stomach. I pay for perfection. I do not tolerate glitches. I turned back to the window, to the raging sea, but my gaze was drawn to the faint, salt-crusted handprints that were slowly, impossibly, appearing on the glass. From the inside, my mind refused to process it. It was a trick of the light, condensation, a flaw in the triple-pane glass. I took a step closer, my bare feet silent on the cold Italian marble. There was no mistake. A small handprint the size of a child's was blooming into existence on the pane in front of me. It wasn't a wet smear. It looked dry, ancient, made of salt and grime and something that looked like dried mud. As I watched, another one appeared beside it, then a larger one further up. I reached out a trembling hand. my fingers hovering just inches from the glass. I could feel a strange coldness radiating from the prints, a damp chill that had nothing to do with the storm. I snatched my hand back as if burned. The air in the room was changing. The crisp, clean, filtered air was growing thick, heavy. A new scent was invading my sanctuary, the cloying, sweet smell of melting incense sticks. The kind my grandmother used to burn at the small altar in her home. It was a smell I hadn't encountered in decades, a smell I associated with prayers and ghosts and things I had long since dismissed. It mingled with the sharp, metallic tang of salt water, creating a perfume of the sacred and the drowned. My silk robe, once a comfort, suddenly felt cold and heavy, clinging to my skin like a damp burial shroud. I felt a prickle of sweat on my neck, cold and clammy. This wasn't a storm. This wasn't a power failure. My fortress was being breached, not by wind or water, but by something else. Something ancient and unwelcome. My throat was dry. I swallowed, the sound loud in the cavernous room. I needed to talk to someone. I needed to hear a human voice tell me this was all a technical issue. I strode to the intercom, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Chi," I called out, my voice strained. "Chi is my head of security, a former soldier, a man who feared nothing. He and his team lived in a separate building further up the drive. Chi, do you copy?" Static answered me, a harsh, rasping sound like sand being dragged across stone. Then, through the static, a voice. It was Chi, but it sounded distant, stretched, as if he were calling from the bottom of a well. "Lok Akna, we having trouble communication." "Chi, what is going on with the storm? And this music? Can you hear this music?" The static crackled and hissed. "Music, Lok Akna. I only the wind, the gates are, the cameras on the lower perimeter are out. We can't see the house." He couldn't hear the orchestra. He couldn't see the house. A chill, deeper than any I had ever known, washed over me. I was cut off. I was alone in here. "Check the generator," I stammered, but the line went dead. Just the sound of the wailing pinpeat, the drumming rain, and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The handprints were multiplying, dozens of them now covering the lower half of the immense glass wall, all sizes. The hands of men who worked the sea, their palms calloused and wide. The delicate hands of women, the tiny, perfect hands of children. They formed a silent, pleading crowd pressed against the glass, their ghostly touch a cold stain on my perfect world. And then I remembered. The memory came unbidden, a flash of scorching sun and the grinding roar of machinery. I was standing on this very cliff, a younger man, sweating in a crisp white shirt, my hands on my hips. I was watching the bulldozers work. They were clearing the last of the old fishing hamlet that had clung to this coastline for generations. A collection of rickety wooden houses on stilts, tangled fishing nets, and the laughter of children who had no concept of what $1 million was. I had paid them all to leave. Generously, I thought. But some had resisted. They spoke of ancestors, of sacred ground, of the Nikta, the guardian spirits of the land who lived in the ancient grove of banyan trees behind the village. The centerpiece of that grove was a cluster of small, ornate spirit houses. Some were simple wooden structures, others more elaborate, decorated with faded paint and offerings of fruit and flowers. The villagers believed the spirits rested there, that they protected the community, ensured a good catch, and kept the storms at bay. I saw them as clutter, as an obstacle to my view. I remember the day the bulldozers moved on the grove. An old woman, the last to leave, stood at the edge of the clearing, her face a mask of wrinkles and sorrow. She wasn't angry. She didn't shout curses. She just watched, clutching a small offering of bananas and incense. As the first ancient banyan tree splintered and fell, crushing the largest of the spirit houses beneath its weight, I heard a collective gasp from the workers. A few even made the sign of prayer. I had laughed. I had turned to my foreman and said, "Their spirits can find a new home. I'm building them a 5-star one." The memory faded, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. I looked at the handprints on the glass, at the spectral crowd that was gathering in my living room. They had found a new home. The music swelled, the melody becoming more urgent, more insistent. It was no longer just outside, it was inside. It was resonating from the marble floors, vibrating through the steel beams, echoing from the high, vaulted ceilings. My house was the instrument and these ghosts were the players. Whispers began to slither through the air, faint at first like the rustling of dry leaves, then growing clearer. They weren't in Khmer, not exactly. It was an older dialect, the language of the coast, of fishermen and farmers. They were speaking names: Vanna, Safia, Pisith, Chan, names I had never heard, but names that belonged to this land long before I did. I stumbled back, away from the windows, my eyes darting around the vast, empty space. My minimalist palace, once a source of pride, now felt like a tomb. The long, empty corridors were mouths of darkness. The polished surfaces, once reflecting my own powerful image, now held fleeting, distorted shapes in their depths. I saw them in the chrome legs of the furniture, in the black glass of the television screen, in the mirror-like finish of the refrigerator. Figures in traditional sampat, their forms watery and indistinct, their faces lost in shadow. They were everywhere and nowhere, a silent, watching audience to my terror. My legs felt weak. I collapsed onto a low, leather sofa that had cost more than a new car. I buried my face in my hands, trying to block it all out. The sounds, the smells, the visions. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself, the words tasting like lies. "It's the storm, stress. I am Lok Aknha Rithasak. I am in control." But my control was an illusion, a pane of glass waiting to shatter. And as I sat there trying to rally my crumbling sanity, I felt a change in the air, a drop in pressure. The whispers ceased. The relentless, weeping music of the pinbeat orchestra faded, note by painful note, until all that was left was the sound of the rain and the howl of the wind. Silence. A heavy, profound silence that was somehow more terrifying than the noise it replaced. I slowly lifted my head, my senses on high alert. Had it passed? Was it over? I looked towards the window. The handprints were still there, a ghostly tapestry of salt against the night. The storm still raged outside, but the presence, the overwhelming weight of unseen eyes, was gone. Or so I thought. A single clear note rang out. It was a ronat, the bamboo xylophone, a slow, deliberate melody, not a lament this time, something else, something ancient and patient. It came from the grand staircase that curved up to the second floor. My blood ran cold. That sound was not a memory. It was not in my head. It was in the house up there. Slowly, shakily, I got to my feet. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to hide, to wait for morning. But this was my house. I would not be a prisoner in my own home. My anger, a familiar and comforting friend, began to burn through the fog of my fear. Who dared to do this? What trick was this? "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice hoarse. "Show yourself." My voice echoed in the cavernous space, answered only by another calm, melodic phrase from the ronat. It was beckoning me, an invitation. I took the first step towards the staircase. The marble was freezing, leaching the warmth from my body. Each step was an act of will. The music continued, a steady, unhurried rhythm leading me upward into the darkness of the upper floor. My private quarters were up there. My bedroom, my office, my sanctuary within the sanctuary. The power chose that moment to die completely. Not a flicker this time. A sudden, final plunge into absolute blackness. The emergency lights, which should have kicked in instantly, remained dark. The hum of the house was gone. There was only the storm, the solitary music from above, and the frantic sound of my own breathing. A flash of lightning illuminated the world outside, and for a split second, the room was cast in a brilliant, stark white light. And I saw them. They weren't reflections anymore. They were in the room with me, standing on my priceless Persian rugs by the sleek designer furniture, their feet leaving no impression. Dozens of them, translucent, shimmering figures dripping seawater that sizzled into nothingness before it could touch the floor. They were the villagers from my memory, The fishermen with their strong, worn faces. The women with their hair tied back, their expressions unreadable. The children, their small forms huddled close to their parents. They were not ghouls, they were not monsters, they were just people, and they were all looking at me. Their eyes were dark voids, but I felt their gaze like a physical weight, a pressure on my soul. They didn't move. They didn't threaten. They just stood there, the silent, rightful inhabitants of this place. In the center of the crowd, right at the foot of the stairs, was the old woman. The one who had watched the bulldozers. In the strobing flashes of lightning, I could see her clearly. Her face was a landscape of grief. She wasn't looking at me with hatred. It was worse. It was pity. She slowly raised a wrinkled, spectral hand. She didn't point at me. She pointed past me towards the great glass wall, towards the land where the banyan grove once stood, the place where the largest spirit house, the home of the Nikta, the guardian of this entire coastline, had been crushed into the dirt. The full pinpeat orchestra roared back to life, not from one direction, but from every direction at once. It was a deafening, overwhelming crescendo of sorrow and judgment. The air grew impossibly thick with the smell of incense and rot, so thick I gagged, my lungs burning. And the house began to weep. I watched in horror as the glass walls, my beautiful, clear walls, began to stream with water. Not rain from the outside, but salt water, weeping from the very pores of the glass itself, running in salty rivulets down to the floor. The polished marble grew slick and dark. The steel beams groaned as if in pain. The whole structure, my monument to modernity, was grieving. In that moment of pure, undiluted terror, I finally understood. They were not here to harm me. They were not here to drag my soul to some hell. They were simply taking back what was theirs, this land, this space. They were claiming my sterile prison as their new spirit house. My villa was their tomb and their temple. And I was just a ghost who didn't know he was dead yet, a trespasser in my own mausoleum, left to bear witness for all eternity. The music, the weeping walls, the silent, staring crowd. This was not an attack. This was my new reality. This was the beginning of my haunting. The storm outside broke as quickly as it had arrived. The sun rose on a perfectly calm sea, the sky a bruised purple and orange. By the time Chi and his men finally forced the main doors open, the light was flooding the grand hall. They found me in a corner, huddled on the floor, my expensive silk robe soaked through and clinging to my shivering body. I was muttering to myself, my eyes wide and vacant. Chi helped me up. Lok Aknha, are you all right? The whole system crashed. A total blackout. We couldn't get in. He looked around the room. To him, it was perfect, pristine. The marble floors were dry and gleaming. The air was cool and clean. There were no handprints on the glass. There was no smell of incense. He saw nothing. He heard nothing. I tried to tell him. I rambled about the music, the faces, the weeping glass. I pointed at the empty spaces where they had stood. Chi listened patiently, his face a professional mask of concern. But I saw the look in his eyes, a look he shared with his men. They thought I had lost my mind. The stress of my empire, the isolation, the freak storm, it had broken me. Perhaps it had. They left me a few hours ago. Doctors were called. Sedatives were prescribed. I am alone again now as the sun begins to set. The house is silent. Everything is back to normal. The lights work. The air is filtered. The illusion of control is restored. But I know the truth. I'm standing before the great window now, watching the sky bleed into darkness. My reflection stares back at me, a pale, haunted man in a house that is no longer his. I raise a hand and press it against the cool glass. Then I breathe out, my breath fogging a small circle on the pane. And as the condensation forms, a shape appears within it. A small, perfect handprint, crusted with salt and the memory of the sea. It rests there for a moment, right beside my own reflection, before slowly fading away. From deep within the walls of my perfect, silent house, I hear it. The faint, mournful and infinitely patient sound of a single bamboo key being struck on a ronet. They are just waiting for the sun to go down. They say you can build a legacy with concrete and steel, that you can buy the future and pave over the past. But they are wrong. Some foundations are not made of stone. They are made of memory, of whispers, of respect. And when you break them, the ground doesn't just crumble beneath your feet. It swallows you whole. So be careful. Be so very careful what ground you choose to build your dreams upon. Because sooner or later, the original owners will come to collect their rent, and they have all the time in the world.